if you met the person that you would love to marry tomorrow, like they got everything you want and more, would you be totally ready to marry them tomorrow? And if the answer is no, then I would just say, why? And number two, that is something you probably need to figure out before you get out and start dating. What's up, fam? This is your boy JJ. It's been a long time. Let's go. This is season 13. We are doing hot takes, controversial takes. I loved our discussion last Wednesday with Kate. It is tough to see people upset, but in the same sense, if it is challenging you and what we know is a good thing, and what we say by that is we know this is biblical, it's truthful, it's wise, not because we said so, but because the Bible says so. And that is like the foundation of how we'd like to approach heart of dating, giving advice. Anytime you're in a position of giving advice, you have to really ask yourself, whose authority am I giving this on? Like, is this out of my authority, my experience, my guidance, or is this rooted in something greater? And so whenever we speak out of personal experience or just simply opinion, like this is not necessarily directly from the Bible, but this is our opinion, we like to make it really clear. And so, for example, when we talk about like today, what does the Bible have to say about dating and marrying based off sexual attraction? Well, there's not a ton to go off specifically per se, but there is something that we can say to it specifically. Especially the Bible gives a very, very clear image on what is essential for marriage and sexual attraction. How does that fit into it? What's the difference between sexual attraction and sexual desire to just simply procreate? Right? These are great questions we have to ask ourselves. So I would just say, when you listen to these hot takes, all throughout season 13, I hope you hear and understand the heart behind them. They're not to just entertain you guys, although controversial hot takes are entertaining. They're not to just offend you, although the truth can be offensive sometimes. They are really meant, Ephesians 5 style, to edify and encourage the body. Like when we speak, when we give advice, when we ask questions, our heart and goal is to truly edify and encourage. So we just pray that the Holy Spirit just guides these conversations, guides literally God, Jesus. I pray right now that I just be a conduit for you and your spirit and your guidance and your truth, that it just permeates. If anything in these episodes, whether it be today or future episodes, is a distraction or causes people to stumble or is not truthful, I take full ownership and accountability. And if anything stirs our heart, if anything challenges, if anything encourages people to love you more, to pursue you more, and glorify you in the way they date, I just give you all the glory. That is absolutely you and has nothing to do with our own accord as broken vessels who are just simply privileged to carry the gospel and the good news. Amen. Amen. So today's episode and what we'll talk about is this, and I love this question: is sexual attraction essential for dating? If I had a hot take, I would probably say something like this. Sexual attraction is not essential for dating. And I would probably also say this, but ... men won't date women they're not attracted to. Men won't date women they're not attracted to. And so before I jump in, let me go ahead and pause and let you guys know what I'm loving lately. In case you couldn't notice, I'm talking a little bit faster today. I'm trying something new. If someone here does struggle with this, please reach out to me. Basically, I think there's people in life, and I would probably categorize myself as one of them, who go far enough and they perform enough professionally or academically to get by. And they might have had undiagnosed ADD and ADHD. Like when push comes to shove and the deadline's due, they get their work done, and maybe it's not the highest quality, but it's good enough. And I think that's me. It might be a prioritization issue. I do know, and this would be confession time, I did take some of my friends' Vyvanse in college around finals, which was illegal, right? Taking an amphetamine I was not diagnosed for it. Again, I was in college, but you do a lot of dumb stuff in college. I haven't taken it since then. But, I guess my hypothesis is I have undiagnosed ADD or ADHD to a degree. To what degree, I don't know. I'm close with people who have severe ADHD, and I would never, quote, maybe compare my challenges with them. But I do think there's something there. One of the ways without getting diagnosed and getting prescription for it that I've gotten by is I do find if I exercise and I drink a ton of caffeine, and I'm talking anywhere from 300 to 500 milligrams of caffeine, which is about 3 to 5 cups of coffee, I actually function much better. I function really well. People come up into my office, and it's like a house club that you find in like Mykonos, Greece, at like 11:30 at night. It's like bumping up there, but it actually helps me focus. So if anyone has any guidance there, I'm all ears. I basically try to find ways to cope. To-do lists have become really, really helpful for me. But I need like energy and I need stimulation, and that actually helps me focus. And that's something that I'm loving lately. Another thing I'm loving lately is we've moved to Franklin, Tennessee. And I think, I don't know, if you guys are listening to this in a big city, maybe you know what I'm talking about. I found that the bigger city I'm in, even though there's more people who might be more compatible with me as a friend, it's actually harder to do community well and the bigger city you find yourself. I think there's more options and more venues as far as activities to do. I think there's more likely that there's a big distance, meaning I meet you at a friend's birthday party. We have a great time together. We really hit it off. I say, I really like this guy, Kate. I'd love to hang out with him and play golf. And then at the end of the night, as we're linking up, I say, by the way, where do you live? And he's an hour and a half away. He's 2 hours away. He's 45 minutes away. So not only is he far, but we both have a lot of things to do. So it's just hard to meet up. And I found, honestly, in Franklin, I've made more male friendships, specifically male friendships. I've made more male friendships here in 2 months than I had in 2 years in Southern California. And so I don't know why that quite might be. I think culturally, people really, really value friendship and relationship here. There might be a little bit less to do other than just hang out with people, right? And the smaller the kind of city you're at. And then I think just living like 15, 20 minutes from anybody and everybody makes a huge difference. So that's what I'm loving lately. I'm really, really loving my community. And then lastly, in my DMs, I love these, and I'm sorry for getting away from them last season. This was a great question I got the other day. Hey, JJ, I've been listening to VSO, and Maddie Pruitt Trout actually was talking about dating out of a calling to be married versus marrying out of necessity or a need or a desire. And he asked, how do you differentiate between feeling called to date and marry and kind of needing and wanting to date and marry somebody? And man, I wish I had a whole episode to answer this question. It's such a great question. I heard JP say this. He did this VSO live, and someone asked this question. And fun fact, we might have a surprise guest with those same initials who sounds just like him and talks just like him and is him this season, coming on with a hot take. And he had a great answer. And I feel like we're kind of moving back in this pendulum or direction. Without having research and off the top of my head, because I didn't prep for that question, I would just say, I don't know if there is a calling to marry. I think it might be over spiritualized at some point. Like, if you have a desire to be married and a want to be married, I think that's gotta just be okay. Like, I think we just have to, one, be honest with our desires. Like, God, first of all, knows that you have that desire and that want. So us kind of like pretending or beating around the bush doesn't really make sense. It's the same thing that we do with a lot of feelings. Like, we kind of just don't really admit them and confess them to God, even though he knows exactly what they are. So I think what I would encourage anybody is be so incredibly honest with what you desire in life and what you want in life. And don't take it to anybody else except for God. And that's like cool. And I think sometimes God like quells desires, for lack of a better word. Psalm 37:4, delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. I mean, I think that should be one of the most appealing verses in scripture. Remember when we all read it when we were like 12 years old and we were like, this is the best verse I've ever read in my life. Okay. But listen, I think God clearly impacts and sees desire, and desire is very important. Like God gives us desire. Some of those desires are just simply fleshly desires. Like I have a desire as a man, a biological man who's wired with a sex drive. I have a desire to fornicate and sexually relate with as many women as possible. Like that is a desire I know I was born with, had in my flesh, in my DNA, that I wrestled with, that through sanctification, right, we've kind of like surrendered to God, right? And that we choose to say, God, this is the desire. I know I feel it. I think that's one of the gifts of singleness, is wrestling with your sexual nature and that desire and asking God, like, what do I do with this? Do I satisfy it? Do I not? Do I just completely surrender it and become a nun? Do I simply just become a priest? Like, what do I do with sexual desire? I think that's one of the best journeys a single goes through. And then the desire to marry, man, I just think like, if you have desire to marry, let's start there and just say, God, I have this burning desire to marry. What should I do with it? What should I do with it? Should I really put myself out there and try and date and get married? Like, is this really just on my mind so much that it's becoming, I mean, and that's where like Paul, it's so funny in 1 Corinthians 7 versus Ephesians, the way that Paul talks about marriage, he's like in Ephesians, 1-4, he's talking about the marriage between Christ and his bride, the church. And it's just so sacred and amazing and crazy. And Ephesians 5 is amazing, where he talks about marriage between husband and wife, not because that's special, because it's a reflection of the gospel marriage. And then in 1 Corinthians 7, he's like, if you're horny, just get married. So it's like, which one is it? And so I think it's both. I think it is a sacred, amazing thing, but I don't know if it's something that I would say you're called to marriage or not. I think we're all called to celibacy while single. And that's just like out of a Christian ethic that glorifies God and it's within his commands. And he says, if you love me, then you'll keep my commands. And we keep his commands because there's great joy in keeping his commands, because it means there's intimacy and relationship with God. And that's what I want. I don't want to be a good boy who's checking off all the boxes and my commandments every day. I love God and I want to have a relationship with him. And if I love God and I keep his commands, then I maintain great relationship with God, right? I don't have sin as a barrier within my relationship between him and I. So yeah, that's what I would say is a long answer. This needs to be a great episode with more research done. But I mean, my gut says, I just like, people are like, do I run this marathon? Do I do hybrid training? Do I do bodybuilding? Do I take this job? Am I called to this job? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think there's always a calling to do this or that. Like, I think God gives you autonomy and free will to choose. So be honest with your desire, take it to God and delight in him, and then choose. I think we often face these decisions in life between A and B, and I think God uses both. I think if we really are trying to glorify God in everything we do, and we're forced to choose between this job or this job, this city or this city, this church or this church, I think if our heart is truly in a place where we want to glorify God, then he'll make it clear, and if not, then do your best to choose. And I think God honors that. If you were to ask me, like, can men specifically date women they're not attracted to? And attracted to would be this, that they're sexually attracted to. Like, should men only date women in the beginning that they're sexually attracted to, and then maybe let that build and grow? Remember, we talked about this on Wednesday with Kate. Like, are women just, like they get the short end of the stick and they're just more emotional beings? Maybe they can not be sexually attracted up front, but they can be emotionally and spiritually attracted, and that physical attraction comes. Is that the same for the man? Or is it essential for a man to be sexually attracted in the beginning in order to just simply ask out a girl? Like, is emotional and spiritual attraction enough for him to ask out a girl? And that's a great question. I think that is a wonderful question for any single guy to ask themselves. And I would just come up with a couple hypotheticals. I mean, like, let's look at two guys. Let's look at John. John has been seeing a girl for 2 or 3 months. She's fair when it comes to physical attraction, but boy, like, emotionally and spiritually, she's the real deal. He's been around her in small group for a year. She's an amazing woman of God. She has a great community of women around her. She's selfless. She's servant-hearted. She's a boss. She runs her own business. I mean, she's super kind. If we're being honest, she's like a Proverbs 31 woman to the P and the 31. And I would just say, like, let's fast forward this 3 months. They've been dating. He finally got challenged by, a mentor of his to ask her out because she's so awesome. And he kind of felt a little pressured into it, but he did it. Let's say he moves forward and he loves everything about her, but he just has this creeping doubt that physically she's not his type. Like, maybe he could find someone who's a little bit more attractive. Maybe she's not in the best physical shape that she's ever been in. What would you tell him to do? Like, if at the end of the day, physically, he just doesn't know whether or not, like, he says that, I don't really know how attracted I am to her physically. What would you tell him to do? And now let's ask Jack. Like, he's been dating a beautiful girl from the get-go. He was super sexually attracted to, physically attracted to. That's the same thing, by the way. Her laugh, like, she's charismatic. Her smile specifically just captivates him. She's a great body that he tries not to think about. And for lack of a better word, he's just kind of obsessed with her. Like, he's checking her Instagram all the time. She's like, quote, he says, out of his league. He says a lot. But her personality and faith is kind of lacking. Like, not only does he kind of find her maybe dull or selfish or immature, but spiritually, he just doesn't really know if she loves God. Like, she's a new Christian. And he feels like whenever he brings up faith, the conversation just doesn't really go anywhere. But he's attracted to her. Like, there is a core attraction in that relationship that he's never had with any girl before. What should he do? Right? He's so physically attracted to her that he's willing to wait on the other buckets. He's willing to wait for her emotionally, spiritually to maybe mature. He wants to move forward, but he's coming to you saying, I don't really know emotionally and spiritually, if I'm that attracted to her, like, if I actually enjoy being around her. What would you tell him to do? Like, what would your advice be for Jack? He's got the physical attraction and he's willing to wait on the emotional and spiritual ones. What would your advice be? Here's a great story. This is a true story. This actually happened recently. I was at the gym. I was waiting for Kate, and a guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, are you and your wife the Christian dating podcast people?" I'm like, "Yeah. I mean, we have a name, but that's not important." And he goes, I just want to thank you for all that you do. And I started asking him questions, how he ended up where he was. And he's like, I actually moved here to date and pursue a woman. And I actually, about, a year ago, this is a true story. He goes, I walked away from proposing to her. Dang. Like, regardless, I don't care what is the reason for either of you who walked away from who. I'm sorry, bro. And as we started to talk, he goes, yeah, man, I love everything about her. Like, she has the most amazing soul, and we're actually still great friends today. And I walked away from her 8 months ago. So obviously I'm intrigued because this guy is telling me that emotionally, spiritually, and on a soul level, this woman is amazing. And part of me wants to give him a hug, and part of me wants to slap him over the head out of love. And, but I just wanted to listen, cause that is the most loving thing you can do sometimes, is just listen. And he said, as he started to open up about it, he said, there was this nagging thought that physically, I just didn't know if I was attracted to her. And, part of me just kept thinking about this narrative and question of, what if I could do better? What if I physically could marry someone who I'm a little bit more physically attracted to, who had all these qualities and traits? and what would you tell that young man? Like, what would you tell him? And I would say this, and I asked him, what did you do? He said, well, my mentor asked me, what do you think would make her feel most loved? Like, before you make this decision to propose to her or not, she's got everything you want, but physically you're just not in a place where you're at the end of the day. For me, I would say, by the way, as a side note, if you say, I'm not sure if I'm physically attracted to her, let me save you something. Let me save you some pain. Let me save you some questioning and some thinking. You're not attracted to her. If you, at the end of the day, say, I don't know if I'm physically attracted, just go ahead and say it. I'm not physically attracted to them. And that's okay. Now, what I would ask him, and what I would ask anyone who says that, is, okay, that's okay. That's totally fine. Why are you not physically attracted to them? Like, what is it about them specifically? And where is that coming from? Because I've seen people look at really objectively beautiful or handsome people and say, I'm not really physically. And it was for the most nitpicky things. I was so physically attracted to them. Then they rolled up their sleeves and they had dirty elbows. Okay. But no, you see what I mean? Like, their ears, their voice, it's just something small. So why are you physically not attracted to them? And more importantly, what are you doing to work through these physical attraction issues? And for this guy, it's like, okay, is your physical attraction even coming from a healthy place? All right, that's a good question we got to ask. So he ended up walking away because his mentor asked that question, what do you feel like would make her feel most love? And he felt like at the end of the day, it's not loving to marry someone that you're not physically attracted to. Now, whether he told her that, I don't know. And I guess that's a good question. Like, do you even tell that person at the end of everything that we've been through, I'm not physically attracted to you? Like, is it loving to tell them that truth and kind of cause that, is clarity really kindness right there? Or is it loving to withhold your truth and just say, I can't do it, and kind of withhold? I would say, in my life experience, and I think biblically, withholding truth, it just simply never works well. And I think clarity and honesty is kindness. I think overly bluntness and, what I would say is this: truth and kindness are married together. Truth and grace are married together. We're called to present the gospel in a truthful and graceful manner. Like, we all know what truth without grace is. It's condemnation. It really can be condemnation or shaming, right? Yes, it is truthful that you're going to hell if you don't accept Jesus. Is it loving to say it that bluntly, right? That's my biggest thing with theology bros and people who are just stuck on absolute truth and letting people know the truth about their identity issues and their sexual attraction. I would say in all of these situations, all of them, John, Jack, the guy at the gym, if they all come up to me and they said, should I move forward? Should I move forward? I would say my absolute answer, my best answer in those moments after talking with them is no, you should not. Because what you are telling me right now is revealing everything I need to know about where you are at emotionally and spiritually, and how you view marriage and how you view physical attraction and sex. And none of you are quite ready for marriage. Because if you're not ready for marriage, my stance is you're not ready to date. Like, you shouldn't be in a relationship. I don't believe in getting ready for marriage as you date and in relationship. Obviously that happens. Obviously not everyone is ready for marriage when they go into dating and they figure it out and they make it work. But my best advice and guidance would say your singleness is your time for you and Jesus to build intimacy, relationship. It's your time to build spiritual formation in your life. It's your time to understand what marriage is really all about. It's your time in life to understand what the gift of sex is and what your sexual desire and needs are. That is what singleness is for, not dating and relationship. Like, those things need to be figured out on the front end. I always define are you ready to date is this. If you met the person that you would love to marry tomorrow, like they got everything you want and more, would you be totally ready to marry them tomorrow? And if the answer is no, then I would just say, why? And number two, that is something you probably need to figure out before you get out and start dating, okay? Because all of these guys, for me, and I think they would all admit this, which is okay, is I'm probably looking for the wrong thing, which is sexual attraction being essential to marriage. Now, is sexual attraction or sexual pleasure essential for marriage? I would say there's a big difference. Sexual relations versus sexual pleasure. And biblically, we are mandated to sexually relate to one another, like give our bodies to our spouse. Now, obviously, in times of abuse, this changes. That's been so abused over the centuries that has been preached. Please hear me out. I obviously know that changes. But we both, if you are signing up for marriage, you are signing up for, I am going to really, really try and give my body in sex to my spouse for their pleasure. Like it is the gift of pleasure for them, not necessarily the focal point being sexual pleasure for yourself. That's why I think sexual attraction is different. I'm sexually attracted enough to give my body to you. Because marriage has seasons of life. Like physical pleasure is so volatile. Like, think about, I love this. It's from John Piper. And we'll start to wrap up. Sexual attraction, if that was the essence of marriage, then aging, like your guys' bodies getting old and wrinkly and changing, would be the gradual end of marriage. As you guys age and sexual attraction naturally kind of wanes, then the goodness, the love of your marriage would naturally and gradually start to end. And guess what? It's actually the opposite. The glories, the foundation, the blessing of marriage actually increase with aging and the waning of sexual pleasures. So is sexual pleasure essential? I really don't know. Is sexual attraction essential? Yes. And there's a big thing about the difference in that. Sexual pleasure is all about what it can do for me and how it brings pleasure into my life. Sexual attraction is, are you sexually attracted to them enough to give your body and enjoy the gift and act of sex? Right? Like, do you see the difference? And so I love this thought. Is sexual attraction essential for dating and marriage? I would say sexual attraction is essential, but at its core, if we're looking at marriage biblically and the covenant, we're talking about the key. Is sexual attraction, is sexual pleasure essential for keeping and maintaining the covenant of marriage? I would say as sexual attraction is, I would say sexual pleasure is not. And that is a huge statement. And I love this conversation so much because I'm not sure where this conversation really happens outside Christian circles. Like, I think the idea of ever, quote, settling for someone physically in terms of physical attraction is a narrative that's never really ever been popular or desired by anyone. Like, if we're all honest, at the end of the day, we want our spouse to not just be sexually attracted to us, but to be so sexually attracted that they get tons of sexual pleasure from our relationship. But, and that's like a common thing. I think about, like movies like Hitch, She's Out of My League, The Sandlot. Like, these are all progressively the women physically kind of overcome, like, maybe they're not the most attractive guy, but emotionally and spiritually, he's just awesome. And I get there. And physically, he is like got no business being there. That is like the hallmark story we see, or we see two people who are just mutually sexually attracted and pleasured by each other going into a relationship. I would say, like, because the world's desire and ultimate desire for sex is the ultimate desire for their marriage. Like, I have to marry someone who is physically beautiful and doesn't just check off the box that I'm physically, sexually attracted to them, but they give me physical pleasure. I mean, they really fulfill me, right? And I think I get so nervous in this conversation because I have seen at its worst men physically being obsessed with women and how attractive they are. Man, I would say this, at its worst, not only have I seen men just not date women that they're not uber physically attracted to, you know what also happens in that same paradigm? They basically pretend like women who are unattractive don't exist. And I would say, like, if there's a route for you to as a man to date someone who's uber attractive, I would ask you the same question. How do you treat women who you're unattracted to? If your value and attention that you give a woman is based off their physical attractiveness, and that changes, like you get really excited, charming, charismatic around a beautiful woman, but a woman who's maybe not so beautiful, you just kind of like don't really engage them. You're not really curious about them. Man, I would have major questions for you. I would have major questions for you. And I mean that in the most loving way. You know, and I just, like, for physical attraction, I would just ask, like, it is important, but how important ultimately is it? Like, if we're looking for a covenantal marriage that's going to go 50, 60 years, like, you're looking for functional covenantal marriage, which is not dependent on how they look. It's really dependent on the status of their soul and their emotional health. Like, that is really what you're marrying at the end of the day. And it's got an exterior covering for it. Like, if you're looking for a car, you're looking for something that can go the distance. Like, you want something with great gas mileage. Like, it's very efficient. It's working well today. It's going to go 200,000 miles without tons of repairs and challenges. It's going to be a newer model. And when it comes to the exterior, like, we also say it's got to be white. It's got to have leather. It's got to have sick rims. It's got to have a Bose sound system. And that's what physical attraction is like. Like, the cars that get you to A to B, like, marriage is, you know, functional. It is the most sanctifying tool ever, and it's functional as a covenant. And I just have a problem with this. I've got to have this, 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 and this. And you have 5 or 6 ridiculous physical qualities that you're looking for in addition to everything else. And I would just say this, instead of it having to be white, meaning that you're looking for a car, I prefer for it to be white. And instead of it's got to have nice, perfect brown leather, well, I prefer leather. It's got to have sick rims and surround sound, Bose, you know, speakers. I prefer that it has nice tires and nice rims and a nice sound system. And guess what? I think what ultimately happens is this. Well, if I prefer these 5 things, you'll most likely end up marrying someone who has 2, 3, or 4 of those, you know, and that's great. And that's great because it's not really essential to the function of the marriage. Is it nice to have? Yeah. But do you have to have it all? Absolutely not. Because even if you do, what's crazy is it's going to fade. It's going to fade. So sexual pleasure is not essential. I have to have all these things to really fulfill this desire and fantasy in my mind. Absolutely not. Do I have a sexual desire with them that after emotionally and spiritually blending that together, I can arrive to a place where physically I am attractive and have a sexual desire to procreate and mingle with them in marriage? Yeah, I could see myself getting there. I could really see myself getting there. And if the answer is no to that, I would say no. Like, long story short, if physically, sexually, like, you can never find yourself getting to a place where you have a desire to give yourself to them. And hear my language, give yourself to them in a mutual, loving, sacred act of worship of sex where they are enjoying it and you are, right? Not this taking sexual pleasure. There's some sex object fulfilling your fantasies and desires left over from porn use, right? That's what I mean. If you can't get to that place where you can't see yourself lovingly giving yourself away in a mutual sexual attraction and desire, then no, I don't think you should get married. I don't. I don't, and I can't. And I've just seen too many stories for people who weren't totally honest at the end of the day, and they married someone who's their pastors, their community, everyone thought they should marry. And after 10 years, it was not really ever a marriage. It was not really ever a marriage. And I just don't think we can sign up for that. So that's my thoughts. That's a hard question. I would ask you guys to talk about it with your best friends. Talk about it ideally with someone who's been married for 10, 20, 30 years. Talk about it with someone who has wrinkles, who's got a pot belly. Talk about it with some old people who are out of shape and still physically, get it on at 60, 70 years old. Talk about it with them and see what they say. And I would love to hear their thoughts. Love you guys. Have a great weekend. And that is our main episode.